to the Nyack Library. I'm Nador Pagosian. I'm the librarian for programs and community outreach, and I want to welcome you all here and welcome our special guests, YAFFED, in their presentation of Yeshiva stories this evening. And I want to welcome the MC for tonight, Mr. Ben Tucker.
Welcome everyone, welcome. It is so amazing how many people were able to make it here tonight, and I truly appreciate it. This is our second installment of the Yeshiva stories. Our first one was last summer. I'll introduce myself. My name is Ben Tucker. I'm the Communications and Development Manager at YAFFED. Who's ready to hear some Yeshiva stories tonight? Round of applause. I love the enthusiasm, everybody. Thank you so much. First, we got to start off by thanking our hosts. I want to thank the Nyack Library. Let's give a healthy round of applause for the Nyack Library. You're welcome. Okay, all right. We're in a library. Tone it down. Okay. So a little bit about YAFFED and what you can expect from the program tonight. If you don't already know about us, YAFFED is a nonprofit advocacy organization, and we exist to advocate for those who cannot advocate for themselves. And that is children who are in schools experiencing educational neglect. Is a systemic issue of educational neglect. It goes unaddressed. And what YAFFED has been able to do in the 12 years since we've existed is we've built a movement to challenge that systemic neglect. It's not something that any one person can do alone. It's something that really takes a large group of people, and we had to build a movement to do that. And what we've been able to accomplish so far is raising awareness in an incredible way. We've gotten the attention of the public, we've gotten the attention of legislators, and we've really even begun to turn the corner and see some action being taken on behalf of these kids. But it's really only through the first-hand perspectives of the people who have been there, the students, the alumni of the yeshivas, the parents, that we're able to get any traction or any of these stories out there. Because we really need to get the stories out there, which is why an event like tonight is so important in terms of getting our stories out there and highlighting what it is we're doing. Because without the courage of the yeshiva graduates who will be standing before you tonight, we really don't have a voice. You know, we really need these courageous yeshiva grads and the parents and in some cases the faculty in Rebbeim to stand up and be a voice for the voiceless. So about the stories, I haven't heard anyone else's story yet, and I only know mine. But I think I'm fairly certain that a common thread that you're going to hear running through a lot of the stories tonight is that yeshivas, like any educational institution, they wield enormous power. And this is a power that when it comes to shaping the minds of young people. And most of us who are in the room are already somewhat familiar with the fact that this power, unfortunately it gets misused and it gets wielded over the powerless, over the children. And until YAFFED existed, it really seemed like that would be the case forever, that nobody would step up and challenge this power and challenge the status quo, and really try to make those who wield this power irresponsibly take accountability. And so that's what tonight really is about, is shining a light on this issue through these first-hand perspectives. And I'll kick it off. I'll share my own story. And that'll open the floor for the rest of our speakers tonight. My story starts in the Lower East Side of Manhattan in a yeshiva called Mesivta Tiferes Jerusalem, which I'll refer to through the rest of the story as MTJ, abbreviated. It was a local school. It was mostly attended by local Lower East Side kids, like myself. It was severely under-resourced. Like, that doesn't even begin to describe it, severely under-resourced. But to their credit, I will say, they did make an honest attempt to provide us with an education. And one example of something that I look back fondly on from my education at MTJ is when we were in second grade, they took us to get library cards, which it was a good show of faith in showing that we we would grow to, in some degree, love literacy in some variation or another, or that it would at least encourage us to explore it. And so the education of the school was as such. Every grade had one rabbi who taught Judaic studies and one English teacher. In a school like mine, whoever is teaching the secular studies is just called the English teacher. They call all of it English. You're either learning Torah or English. So our English teacher was usually not a qualified teacher. It was like a parent from the neighborhood. And they would stand in front of us for 2 hours and teach us English, math, science, and history. And I went to this school through elementary school, and I continued on in high school, kind of expecting more of the same. But in high school, things actually changed really drastically, as it does very often for a lot of students in yeshiva. The principal and the rabbis of my school were no longer local Lower East Side rabbis. They were Satmar Hasidim from Brooklyn. And the students in the school were more frequently from Brooklyn than they were locally. Typically, they were kids that didn't fit in for some reason or another at their school. But generally speaking, they were from Hasidic backgrounds, and I was outnumbered as a local student. And the secular education was probably the most drastic change. We no longer had 2 hours. We had 60 minutes, maybe 90 minutes if you took the right classes, and most of it was taught by the Rebbeim. We did not have English teachers anymore. It was just the rabbi teaching by rote for about 60 minutes at the end of the day. At the very end of the day, you're talking like the day starts at 7:45 and it's like 5 o'clock, and we could barely pay attention at all, and just kind of like shoehorned in an hour of English programming. My 10th grade Rebbe, I remember this the most from my yeshiva experience. He was a man who he exerted control through fear and intimidation. The best way to describe him is a terrorist. The beard didn't really help his case, to be honest with you. I quickly lost count of all the things that a young teenager might do that would condemn him to an eternity in Gehenna, which, if you've never heard of Gehenna, it's Judaism's idea of hell. It's not fun. It does not sound like fun. And so we were threatened a lot with various things that would send us to a lifetime in Gehenna. And if that wasn't enough, we were also threatened with earthly problems, because we were told that if we had cell phones, if we talked to girls our age, if we used the internet, if we had a laptop, that would lead us to being suspended or expelled from school. So that's an immediate problem. For some reason that I can't remember, we were allowed to have iPods. I don't know if anyone remembers the spinny wheel iPods, like the first generation of iPods. That was allowed because the idea was that if we could fill up our iPods with Jewish music, and that would be totally kosher. But but the Rebbeim would take the iPods away occasionally and do a check through them and make sure it was all no Goyish music on there, because that condemns you to, you guessed it, lifetime in Gehenna. The one thing that our Rebbe was not able to control, through all of his fear and intimidation, was the fact that the Seward Park Library was just a block away from our yeshiva. And we still had those library cards from 2nd grade. We still had them. And so my friends and I, very frequently, on our walk home from yeshiva, would pop into the Seward Park Library. It was right there on the way home. Nobody was following us. Nobody was, it wasn't specifically mentioned that we couldn't go there. And what that enabled us to have was a world of Goyish music right at our fingertips. We would go and check out a stack of CDs, take them home, put them on our iPods. But the one thing that we had to do, so that we wouldn't get in any trouble, is we take our newest music discoveries, and I would change the names of the music just in case my iPod got taken away the next day. And so the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, and the Grateful Dead became Shlomi Dax, Mordechai Ben David, Avram Fried. In hindsight, that was a lot of extra work just to develop a musical taste. But I remember at the time thinking, just imagining that if my Rebbe took away my iPod and listened to the Dead, just to prove that it wasn't Avram Fried, that would have been worth it. If I got suspended, I could have lived with that, you know? Making my Rebbe listen to the Dead, that would have been worth it to me. One day, I had to go on the subway after yeshiva for some reason. I was running an errand. And I ran into the one teacher in my entire yeshiva who was a qualified teacher. He was what you would call, he was a relic of the past. He was a New York City public school teacher, a real-life New York City public school teacher. And he would come to MTJ in the afternoon, after teaching math at Norman Thomas High School, and teach us math. And I was on the subway with him, and he told me that he wanted to share something with me. He said, "Don't share this with the rabbis. Don't tell anyone I told you this. But your principal has put me under strict orders to not teach math well enough for anyone to pass the math regents." Because we all took the regents. We took them. Some of us passed some of them. I remember passing some of my regents by some miracle. But his instruction was that if he could sabotage our math instruction enough that we would fail the math regents, then it would ruin anyone's shot of getting into college. That was the theory of our principal. And he felt like he was doing his part to ensure that nobody got into college, because college leads you to a lifetime in Gehenna. You know, that's the logic, you know. I told my parents the second I got home. When I was growing up, my parents complained a lot about the price of yeshiva tuition, and they would constantly tell me how much they were looking forward to me being in CUNY so they can pay CUNY tuition. And I took this as a sign that I was actually intended to go to college. So I came home, I told them this conundrum. I said, "It seems like we might be running out of time to make this happen. Did you actually mean for me to go to college?" And we had to do something about it. So I asked my parents to switch me into a better high school, Yeshiva University High School for Boys, MTA in Washington Heights. And even though the tuition was significantly higher than MTJ's, because it was a well-resourced school with a robust academic program, my parents told me they would make it work, and they did. And so for the first time in my life, I found myself in a yeshiva with a real academic program. I had a guidance counselor. They made me a special schedule, and I took, throughout 9th and 10th grade, I took 9th and 10th grade classes throughout 11th and 12th grade, and also during my lunch break. I alternated classes 2 days a week, and this did a great job of catching me up. I passed all of my regents going forward after that. I registered and I took the SATs, which I had never heard of before I switched in there, and I wound up getting a bachelor's degree from CUNY. And that's my happy ending, if you can call it that, you know? Because I'm haunted by the idea of what may have happened if I never ran into my math teacher on the subway that day. And I truly, strongly believe that nobody should be faced with making the decision that I had to make as a teenager. And nobody should be forced to leave their yeshiva just to pursue a basic education. And that's why I work at YAFFED now as the Communications and Development Manager, because I don't want anyone to be forced to make a decision that I had to make. And so I hope that when you hear the stories tonight, you might think about what it would look like for all yeshivas to take their power responsibly. Because that's the type of future that we're working for at YAFFED. A future where children receive an education that not only rigorously studies the words of the Torah, but also the values of the Torah. Values of self-sufficiency, responsibility, and contribution to one's community. Meaningful contribution to the communities around us. Because these are the values that have led the Jewish people to survive throughout history, adapt, thrive, and the values that make us the people of the book. And so with that, I'm going to call up our first speaker, who is the first person in New York City history to successfully sue their child's yeshiva for failing to provide a secular education. Her favorite author is Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, among other books. please welcome the Executive Director of YAFFED, Beatrice Weber.
Some of my happiest childhood memories happened right here in Rockland County. You can hear me without the mic, right? Yes? I didn't grow up here in Rockland County. I grew up in Canada, but I had uncles living here. And those memories from many years ago remain with me. Probably about 1983, rolling with my rollerblades down that long hill. Some of you may know it. Some of you who are old Rockland County people, Maple Leaf Avenue, Route 306, that big dip. Well, by the time I got down the hill, I was flat on my back. But I'll never forget chasing after fireflies and all those happy moments together with my cousins here in Rockland County. My connection to Rockland County remained for many years. When I was 16, my parents actually moved to Rockland County for a couple of years, and I lived here then for a couple of years. And I remember then hearing the mumblings. Things were changing up here. I remember a lot of the complaining about the high property taxes, complaining about things were changing. I remember, sitting around the dining room table and hearing some of my relatives starting to plan what they would do and how they would change things, because they had all moved to Rockland County thinking it will be a more economical way to live, and then, what is going on? We have to do something. So I remember hearing those conversations. I'll never forget my mom saying, okay, let's do it. Let's all show up at the public school with all of our kids, and let's see what they'll do then. So there was a lot of kind of this that I heard back home as a kid. Years later, I would move back to Rockland County after living in Israel for a couple of years. I moved back with 7 children and had my 3 youngest children in Good Samaritan Hospital. By then, things had absolutely, completely changed. I was a Hasidic woman growing up in the community and did what we all did when I moved back to Rockland County, went to find a school for my kids. It never dawned on me to evaluate the academic level of the school or whether the school was actually complying with any sort of regulations. And it just was a given that I would send my children to a Hasidic school, and it was just what it was, the price we had to pay. I want you to know that as a mother in the community, we always complained. The moms would always complain, especially about the boys, and we'd be like, they're there for so many hours in school. Why can't they learn a little more? Why can't they do a little more? But there was no way that we could actually affect any change. As a woman in the community, there was no way that our complaints or our words would go anywhere. Now, I want to be clear that there are yeshivas in this county, as there are across the state, that do provide an education. But because of the way my family and we were situated in the community, those were not options for my children. One of my children, I thought he would do well in a high school, and I remember broaching the subject to my parents, and they were absolutely horrified. So I have 10 children, 6 boys. None of them have a high school diploma. My youngest son, as Ben mentioned, I just won a case against the state, and as a result, the repercussions of that were severe. I lost my job in the community. I had to move out of the apartment I was living in because I was being stalked. My ex-husband up here in Rockland County got extra funding for family court, which is one of the main reasons I come up to Rockland County nowadays. So it's really good to be here and talk to you, because in 2015 I moved to Brooklyn for work. And one of the other repercussions was, as a result of me filing this complaint and winning, my son was kicked out of the school, which speaks to how hard it is to speak up. Like, it's real. On a personal level, it enabled me to eventually enroll him into a good school, so I'm very, very grateful. And when he comes home from school and tells me his favorite subjects our science and tech. I'm just like filled with joy that he does have the opportunity. There's so much talk here in this county about what's going on, especially in East Ramapo, and I need to give some words to that topic. I can't stand in front of you and not speak to that. I want you to know that we are part of the coalition working for change, and we're very grateful to be able to sign on to petitions and to show up in spaces to make sure that what needs to happen there happens. But I want to make it very clear that what YAFFED advocates for is for the education of these children, okay? And what is going on there is an absolute injustice to all the children in the school district. I want you to know that at the current time, because of regulations that were passed in 2020, all school boards are responsible for the non-public schools in their district to ensure that they provide a substantially equivalent education, which is very basic, but it needs to happen. They need to have teachers who prepare lesson plans, who can teach. They need to have high school classes for boys. That is not happening now. So it is a responsibility to make sure that all children get an education. And children should never be pitted one against the other. You know, when there's limited resources, it's so easy to say, you know, it's so easy to pit one group against the other. But I'm here to tell you that these children don't have anyone looking out for them. They don't have anyone going into those classrooms and saying, these children deserve an education, they deserve better. That is not what's happening. You might pass the school buildings and say, oh wow, what a beautiful school building, or look at all those school buses taking those kids to school. This looks wonderful. But I'll tell you, you'll walk into those schools, into those Hasidic schools, and you won't find one qualified teacher. Sometimes you won't even find a teacher that can speak and read and write English properly. So I know you're from across the county, you're across different school districts. I know some of you do this already. Show up at the school board meetings. Speak up about this issue. This is a county with the highest amount of students in Hasidic yeshivas after New York City. The fact that all of these children are not getting an education impacts every single one of us. It's no longer an issue that impacts a small community. It's an issue that impacts every one of us. So the more you can do to speak up and to show up on behalf of these children, I'll be tremendously grateful to you. I have grandchildren now in these schools, here in Rockland County. And I hope that by the time they graduate elementary school and they graduate high school, they will have received the education that they deserve, and they'll have the opportunities that they deserve available for them. So thank you, and I will now turn over.
One more time, give it up for Beatrice Weber. Very inspiring person to work for, by the way. Our next speaker is an activist, a pianist, a composer, and a music teacher. He's the founder of the Center for Artistic Freedom, which is a new art education program, which will be offering free and low-cost art and music lessons to people from secular, insular religious sects. He can be found on Instagram at Scott the Pianist. His favorite book is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Everyone welcome Scott Kessler.
Thank you. You know, sometimes someone talks about something from your childhood and you think, yeah, that was weird. It was weird that the person who taught all of the secular studies was called the English teacher. You know, science, history, math. Because it's just weird. I'm very proud to be speaking about this. I'm very proud to be sharing this stage, or podium rather, with Beatrice and Ben and the other speakers today. I'm always proud to speak about this because no one else is speaking about this but us. And the only way we're ever going to get change is by speaking about it. We have this awful, bizarre, horrible situation where, you know, thousands and thousands of Jewish kids are not getting an education in New York. Jewish children in New York and New Jersey and around the country and the world, they just don't have the same right to an education pretty much as non-Jewish kids. My yeshiva story isn't the worst yeshiva story you know, that there is or that you may hear today. But in this century, in this decade, I went to school in a basement. We had 3 teachers for everyone, you know, 20 students. There was this local supermarket, and the rabbi was friends with one of the employees there. And this employee would give the rabbi the food that he would otherwise throw out at the end of the day. And that would be our school lunch. And sometimes it was spoiled or moldy, and we would not have anything else. We would just eat around that. You know, the teachers were not qualified at all. They just didn't know their subjects. I remember one day, the whole class argued with the English teacher because she put a Yiddish word on the wall for us to spell. And we said, that's Yiddish. But she said, no, it was English. I don't think she knew. You know, they didn't know the basics of their subject. The math teacher didn't know math. And when I was 16, I started public school. And public school blew me away. Public school was the most incredible experience, just my zone public school, the most incredible experience I've ever had in my life. It changed the trajectory of my life. For the first time in my life, I was in this place where people learned and knew things. I can't even put into words how incredible it is, and I wrote them down. You know, it was just shocking, the difference. You know, one year I was in yeshiva in the basement, and the next year I was in my public school, 5 blocks away. And the kids knew, I was always the top of my class. In public school, I was not the top of my class. I was in the bottom. I was dead last. I was behind everyone so much. And it's just, it's infuriating, you know? But I loved public school. The teachers knew their subjects well. One of my teachers from public school, she's here today, and she taught acting. She worked in theater. She was a leader in the field. She's incredibly qualified to teach. I never had a qualified teacher in yeshiva, not once. We had 2 hours of secular studies a day. In public school, we had 8 hours. That's 4 times as good, at least. You know, it was just so stark, the difference. And imagine if yeshivas were like that. Imagine if yeshivas were at least as good as public schools. You know, that's what we're owed. We're owed an education. We deserve it. We are owed it like anyone else. And we're just not getting it. I struggled. It makes me, it makes me a little emotional. It makes me angry, and I think sometimes I struggle to speak about it coherently. But maybe if I had a better English teacher. Imagine if growing Orthodox Jews, growing up Orthodox, we think of ourselves as the most intellectual and the most learned, and we think we spend all day learning, and then we know nothing about the world, not a damn thing. We don't know how it works, we don't know who lives in it, we don't know its history, we don't know anything. And in our extreme, profound ignorance, we think we're the most knowledgeable and the smartest. And I mean, it would be nice, but we're not. We're not. It's so much the opposite. I was going to try to make this positive. Hold on. I think the positive thing is the potential. I mean, if they weren't trying to keep people out of college, if they were professional, if they would hire real qualified teachers, you know, in New York State, you need a bachelor's to start teaching, and you have to get your master's within 5 years. You don't need a diploma to teach in a yeshiva. I mean, these yeshivas, they get money from the government, millions and millions. They take tuition, and what do we get for it? Where does it go? It doesn't go to the teachers. I know it doesn't go to the teachers because my mother taught in yeshivas, and sometimes she didn't get paid. I know people teach in yeshivas and they make minimum wage. It's not going to the teachers. It's not going to books and computers. The state will give money to yeshivas for computers, and they won't buy any computers. They won't get Wi-Fi, they won't do any of that. It's not going there. Why are we spending all this money and getting nothing for it? You know? I wish yeshivas were at least as good as public schools. That's the law. That's what we deserve. And public schools, they have their problems, but when you're a yeshiva student going to public school, you don't see any problems. Because you see where you're coming from and you see this incredible place like nothing you've ever seen. I'm never going to get over public school. I'm never going to get over my, you know, my first month there. Like, it was just shocking. At the end of the day, kids are entitled to an education. In New York State, they're entitled to it under the law. It's been the law for 100 years. And we're gonna get it. We're gonna fight for it. And this has been a problem for decades and decades, and nobody ever did anything about it until YAFFED started fighting for it. I mean, I'm just extremely grateful for it, and I want to thank YAFFED. I want to thank everyone for coming. And I should probably read a picture of Dorian Gray, because I haven't. Maybe some people read it in school. But thank you, everyone. And yeah.
Give it up one more time for Scott Kessler. I'm going to bring up our next storyteller. Our next storyteller says that while his yeshiva education was technically legal, it was terrible. And so he supplemented it heavily with books from his local public libraries. Ironically, he says the only job he was ever fired from was a library volunteer job, which is a story for another time, maybe at the Library Stories event. And his book recommendation, everyone's doing a book recommendation tonight. His book recommendation is The Ape That Understood the Universe by Steve Stewart Williams. Please welcome our next storyteller, Mordechai Ovitz.
When I tell my yeshiva stories, I get distinctly different reactions depending on the audience. Let me give you an example story. In 7th grade, my class went through 5 or 6 science teachers. The yeshiva communicated very strongly, if not in so many words, that the secular classes in the second half of the day were not worthy of respect. The kids heard the message loud and clear. They were monsters during secular studies, behaving so disrespectfully and so disorderly that one teacher after another quit. Finally, one teacher stuck it out. His name was Mr. McKeown, and he had bushy red hair. He didn't survive to the end by being able to control the class much, but rather just by not quitting. On the last day of school, kids are naturally exuberant. Even in non-dysfunctional schools, discipline is weaker on the last day. In my yeshiva, the final day typically consisted of destroying textbooks and making a mess. On the last day of 7th grade, Mr. McKeown walked into the classroom and put his briefcase flat on his desk. The kids were barely paying attention to his existence. He opened his briefcase, took out a thick stack of papers, and loudly announced that he was giving a surprise test. The room fell completely silent as the class just stared at him. Some kid behind me squeaked, "Why?" Mr. McKeown's face turned a shade of red, unachievable by anyone not Irish without stroking out. He slammed his briefcase shut and yelled, "Revenge, baby, revenge!" Spittle literally flew. We froze in shock. When I tell that story to outsiders, for example, a coworker, they react with incredulity. "That's crazy," they'll say. And they're right, of course. It's ludicrous that a school allowed that to happen. But I was a kid, so I had no idea how abnormal that event was. But when I tell that story to my Hasidish peers, I finish with the part about Mr. McKeown yelling, and they say, "And then he beat you, right?" My education was abominable. Theirs was worse. My first inkling that Hasidic yeshivas were even worse than mine was at weddings. I was sometimes seated with Hasidic relatives of mine, and I'm not bashful, so we talk. Inevitably during these conversations, I had to explain something I had said, and they liked that. Soon they were just asking me questions. I suppose it helped that as someone outside of their community, it was safer to talk to me. I'm not sure. But they asked me very, very basic questions, and some that betrayed painful ignorance. They asked me things like, what's the difference between a cell and an atom? Okay? They asked me if black people are a different species. That was ignorance asking, not bigotry telling. They didn't know the answer to those questions, and they wanted to. They were starved for knowledge, yet another thing that as a child, I didn't realize was pathological. That wasn't the only time I was confronted with the travesties common in Hasidic education. When I was a bit older in yeshiva, I had a roommate who had gone to a Hasidic yeshiva. He was popular, much more so than I. He had strong people skills and could be very funny. One day, I realized he was secretly illiterate. I saw a tiny bit of writing that he had accidentally left out in our room. It was phonetically spelled chicken scratch, the letters big and block like a child's. I was stunned. I had never even considered that anyone my age could be secretly illiterate, but he was. I suddenly realized that I had never seen him read. Everyone reads something sometime, right? But even as his roommate, I couldn't recall him reading anything other than like the labels on food. I sat on this discovery for a bit, mulling it over, and then I talked to him. I told him that I had figured out that he couldn't really read English. I offered to teach him how to read better. I said that his secret belonged to him, and that if he didn't want to, I wouldn't tell anyone, even if he said no. But if he wanted to, we could use the privacy of our shared room to do some reading lessons. He said okay. I knew he would never want to do like C-spot run stuff. It's too embarrassing. But like a lot of yeshiva guys, he was really into mafia stories. So I took those out of the library, and we read them together. He'll probably never make up for the deficit caused by his Hasidic education. but he eventually improved enough to read garbage like Mario Puzo. Some yeshivas, even when they teach anything at all, can be actively against education. I attended business school and rabbinical college at the same time. One of the Bachrim at the rabbinical college wanted to do the same, but the yeshiva high school he had attended, and his parents paid for, refused to send a transcript because they did not want him to go to college. That's another thing that outsiders are agog at in my yeshiva stories that insiders are just like unsurprised by. But he really wanted to go to college, so he put on his suit and went to see the dean of the business school. He told her the truth, that he had gone to high school and that they were refusing to send his transcript for religious reasons. He told her that he was capable of handling college. She approved his admission. When he was back at the rabbinical college dorm, he was exulting with his acceptance letter, gloating over the failure of his high school principal to stop him from getting into college. I offered a small suggestion. Who here is old enough to remember fax machines that use thermal paper? I mean, who even remembers fax machines, right? For you kids, it used heat instead of ink to print. The special thermal paper came on rolls, not on individual sheets. We went down to the rabbinical college's office, stuck his acceptance letter into the top of the fax machine, dialed his former high school principal's fax number, and hit send. Now, if you're old enough to remember these things, they went really slowly. It's like, it started going through. And as the letter came out of the bottom of the fax machine, we scotch taped it to the top of the letter. The fax machine spent the next hour sending his acceptance letter in a never-ending loop, only stopping when the other side hung up because it ran out of thermal paper. And it didn't run out of ink because there was none. We dropped a 40-foot-long banner of his college acceptance letter on the floor of his high school principal's office. A few years later, he graduated. No one should have to go through any of this. If you starve your child of food because that's what you say your religion requires, the government will intervene. Educational neglect is child abuse, just like nutritional neglect is. There's no excuse for criminal educational neglect, which is why I support YAFFED, and so should you. Thank you.
One more time for Mordechai Ovis. Mordechai is one of the skilled few who was at our last storytelling event as well, and I immediately reached out afterwards and was like, we need to keep your number on speed dial, basically, for the next future ones. So our next speaker was raised in the Hasidic community of Williamsburg. She is the voice of Yiddish Duolingo, if anyone here uses the Duolingo app. She works as a professional interpreter and translator. In college, she studied psychology and linguistics, and her favorite book is the Diagnostic Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM. Profoundly influential book, but please welcome to the stage Libby Pollack.
Hello everyone. Hello. Just leave it here. Okay. I am actually going to switch it up a little because I already presented a year ago and I didn't want to do the exact same thing. So I made a little poem. It's still under construction, but let's start. Okay. Hello. How odd it is to be back in my forbidden place, my dangerous but safe space, where I got my education, where my mind would on occasion explore and vacation. In the Brooklyn Public Library, I had to sneak at secular books to take a peek, hoping knowledge of my scandalous rendezvous wouldn't leak. We weren't allowed to read secular books. Devouring outside world knowledge was an act for the crooks. I was raised in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, in a Hasidic community where mingling with Gentiles wasn't common, or modern Orthodox Jews, or anyone different than us. Yiddish was my first tongue, and English was taught slowly. Having any ideas about sports, culture, or music was an anomaly. In elementary, everything was censored. The readers and science books were closely monitored. In order to hide vital information, for example, such as evolution or animal reproduction, the pages were glued so we wouldn't be wooed by actual bees and birds or other lethal words. In order to read the forbidden stuff, we had to rip the pages apart, which was tough. They once even crossed out the word love. How queer. But love didn't exist in our world, so that's fair. Thirsty for knowledge, I'd read the ingredients on every cereal box or packets of herring and lox and memorize every detail of a container of shampoo or conditioner. Ammonium lauryl sulfate, sodium phosphate, disodium phosphate, red 40, blue 60. I may have forgotten the exact numbers, but I was able to recite the ingredients in my slumber. Although our secular classes were filled with much ado about nothing, if you told me that Shakespeare was king of English literature, I would just blink and not know if that was in the past or future. Math, science, and core essentials prohibited. Instead, what was exhibited was the importance of being a good wife. Happy husband is the goal of the best life. Rolling dough in home economics, I do appreciate that I was taught how to sew. If a button pops, I don't panic and yell, oh no. While we didn't know about lesbians or gays, we took lessons for hours and days on the laws of YAFFED, which means not being alone with men. They said if a man thinks about you, it's your sin. It doesn't matter when it was that he saw your seductive dress that was shorter than 4 inches below the knee. You caused an eternal mess if you made him think about a she. They taught us a basic class on phonics. 1 + 1, but nothing about sports or Olympics. That was for the Greeks in the evil Hellenistic times. They painted those images of the stadium in terms so bleak. Theater so provocative was certainly a crime. Want to be active? Wake up early to serve God, who is so full of might. Any extra energy should be reserved the Yetzer Hara, Satan, to fight. You want to see what the Goy does? That's the evil inclination. We know better as the chosen nation. That didn't stop me from getting a binoculars pair, and into the home of my Puerto Rican neighbors I would stare. I watched TV vicariously through their window. I'd hold it up tirelessly and catch show after fascinating show. Of course no Olympics, but what about aerobics? Let's talk about sticks. Spanking kids was good exercise. Whether they forgot their learning or just wanted to be wild, King Solomon so wise said withholding your rod shows hatred to your child. And who needs college when all the knowledge is in the Torah? You need no other Morah. If you're a true Torah sage, then you can compete with any doctor, lawyer, or scientist of any age. So return to your Talmud and flip page after page. My uncle's cousin Barry Lefkowitz can't even sign a check, and he earns such a high wage. When I was 18 and ready to get married, I was a young jewel. I thought I'd stay in the system, but still be a little cool. But I felt like a fool when my arranged marriage flopped because they set me up with a tool. I tried to get my transcripts from high school. Well, the rest of it I'll just say because I didn't have enough time to finish the poem. Basically, I went down to my high school with another OTD friend, and because the GED process was very difficult after years of being out of high school, and especially if you never were taught proper stuff to begin with. So some people told me that they managed to get their transcripts from Yeshiva and still get a degree, so I thought that would work. But I was faced with a lot of resistance. Anyway, it would have been useless. And then my high school principal left me a very long recording afterwards on my voicemail saying how her heart was bleeding for me, saying that I want to pursue an education. Long story short, I ended up just doing it anyway, and here I am, back to my Back to my safe space and forbidden place, the public library.
One more time, everyone, round of applause for Ray Pollock. Our next storyteller is going to have a musical presentation. And so while our storyteller sets up, I thought it would be a great time to do some reading. Can't have a program in the library without a little bit of reading. So the book that I brought with me is not my favorite book. My favorite book is The Power Broker, or as I sometimes call it, the Sixth Book of Moses. The book that I brought with me is The Chosen, which is a notable book about yeshiva students. The book was actually written by a graduate of the high school that I mentioned earlier, MTA, that I switched into, where they actually provide us with academics, and where somebody like Chaim Potok can graduate and become a world-renowned author. This book has everything in it. It's got friendship, libraries, it has yeshiva students, rabbis, and baseball, most importantly. So I will do a short reading while Avi sets up. Every Orthodox Jew sends his male children to a yeshiva, a Jewish parochial school, where they study from 8 or 9 in the morning to 4 or 5 in the evening. On Fridays, the students are let out at 1 o'clock to prepare for the Shabbat. Jewish education was compulsory for the Orthodox, and because this was America and not Europe, English education was compulsory as well. So each student carried a double burden: Hebrew studies in the mornings and English studies in the afternoons. The test of intellectual excellence, however, had been reduced by tradition and unvoiced unanimity to a single area of study, the Talmud. Virtuosity in Talmud was the achievement most sought after by every student of a yeshiva, for it was the automatic guarantee of a reputation for brilliance. Danny attended the small yeshiva established by his father outside the Williamsburg area in Crown Heights. I attended the yeshiva in which my father taught. This latter yeshiva was somewhat looked down upon by the students of the other yeshivas of Brooklyn. It offered more English subjects than the required minimum, and it taught its Jewish subjects in Hebrew rather than in Yiddish. Most of the students were children of immigrant Jews who preferred to regard themselves as having been emancipated from the fenced-off ghetto mentality typical of the other Jewish parochial schools in Brooklyn. Danny and I probably never would have met, or we would have met under altogether different circumstances, had it not been for America's entry into the Second World War and the desire that this bred on the part of some teachers in the yeshivas to show the Gentile world that yeshiva students were as physically fit, despite their long hours of study, as any other American student. They went about proving this by organizing the Jewish parochial schools in and around our area into competitive sports leagues. And once every 2 weeks, the schools would compete against one another in a variety of sports. I became a member of my school's varsity softball team. That is The Chosen. I highly recommend it if anyone here has not read it, just to give a great picture of yeshiva students and where they could be. And with that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Avi Birnbaum. Avi was born Byron Gregory Birnbaum to a Jewish mother and a father who converted from Catholicism. It's a little weird that you're like right in front of me while I'm doing this, but and a father who converted from Catholicism to satisfy his mother's requirements for marriage. By the time he was in 3rd grade, his family got in touch with Chabad and began to rapidly shift into Orthodoxy, ultimately landing Avi in an ultra-Orthodox community in Muncie. He left his community for good at around 23 years old. From 1st grade through Beis Medrash, which is a post-high school program with intensive Torah study, Avi passed through 9 different schools, followed by 7 different universities, before finally finding his educational rhythm, where he graduated with honors from Columbia at 33 years old. Now at age 46, Avi is currently pursuing a master's degree in social work at NYU, and he has plans to get his doctorate degree afterwards. His favorite book is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Everyone welcome, Avi Birnbaum.
Wow, listening to one story is intense from a speaker. Thank you so much, and thank you to YAFFED. What an incredible organization. I had no idea this existed even a couple of months ago. I was introduced through Footsteps, which I had no idea existed even a couple of months ago. And I'm 25 years out of the community. I think when I left, none of this existed. It was a much different climate. So I'm very grateful to be here and be part of this awareness portion. I believe it would fit into YAFFED's program. And I want to thank everyone here for listening, because this is extremely validating. Not only have I never told the story really to anyone who didn't already know it, but nobody has certainly asked me to tell the story. So validating is sort of the feeling, the emotion that I can think of. So Ben gave you a good idea of what I'm up to and where I've come from. That's right, 9 schools from 2nd to 12th grade, 7 universities before I graduated. Was my family military? No. Was my father a traveling salesman? No, he was not. Was he of last name Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, traveling the country and making millions of people happy? No, he was not. Were we Bedouins? We were not Bedouins. So what the hell was going on? Why was I subjected to such chaos during my prime developmental years along with my siblings? And the best I can come up with is proselytism and spiritual bypassing of our family trauma. I think my mother in particular had the right idea, but the spiritual bypass that took place, avoiding some other deep issues that needed to be addressed, was probably why we went through all of that. So my message here today is, anyone who has their kids in a yeshiva or a religious institution, for God's sakes, think about their education and emotional stability during their prime developmental years. And also, for God's sakes, hang on to your money. If your kid's being threatened by their school with expulsion because they are a bad influence, aka they don't understand why age 21 they have to be dressed like an 18th century accountant, well, that's the time for them to seek their own personal, unique identity. So do yourself a favor and listen. Just listen to them. It will make a world of a difference. The song is a true story. It's called $25,000 More. Can y'all hear that all right? A little louder? That's good. Okay. $25,000 more, the yeshiva was happy, but I was still sore. My parents got honored, I was running for the door. $25,000 more. Torah mitzvahs were studied well, but math and science can go to hell. If you're falling behind, they'll show you the door, unless you got 25,000 more. Money isn't everything, but it's for sure. It'll buy you a seat on the basement rush floor. You might learn nothing but to smoke cigarettes and live a few decades with deep regrets. If you're lucky, you'll find a guide, someone to teach you a sense of pride in your search for knowledge, your thirst for truth. Let's guide the children, enrich the youth. $25,000 more, the yeshiva was happy, but I was still sore. My parents got honored, I was running for the door. $25,000 more. Torah mitzvahs were studied well, but art and philosophy could go to hell. If you're falling behind, they'll show you the door, unless you got 25,000 more. It took 13 years to get my first degree, 7 universities and a whole lot of fees. I didn't have the skills and no one taught me. I got my first diploma at age 33. I did not get a high school diploma, but I did graduate. I won't complain, everyone has a path, but it won't hurt God if you're good at math. So let's do a lot better and let's change our dance and send our kids out with a fighting chance. $25,000 more, the yeshiva was happy, but I was still sore. My parents got honored and I was running for the door. $25,000 more. Torah and mitzvahs were studied well, but writing and history could go to hell. If you're falling behind, they might show you the door, unless you got 25,000 more. The kids are the future, we should level up, enrich and diversify the Yiddish cup. What are you afraid of? Think you're going to hell if you take the SATs? Kinder and guilt is the shine of Welt, but Seichel can't be bought and we know that too well. If we hinder the Kinder and we value the guilt, we're gonna need $25,000 more. $25,000 more. The yeshiva was happy and I was so sore. My parents got honored and I was running for the door. $25,000 more. Torah and mitzvahs were studied well, but math and science can go to hell if you're falling behind. They'll show you the door unless you got 25,000 more. Now the serious part. Thanks to YAFFED, we can turn it around. There's a whole lot of hope for a better turnout. So let's put our heads together and figure it out and keep our $25,000 now. It may seem like I'm trying to blame everyone for my problems, but the truth is, and I've come to believe, that a large part of it is my own doing as well. Can't we find a way to help those who don't quite fit into the fundamentalist Jewish life? What about the kids who do fit in? Shouldn't they be given a proper education to navigate the real world outside the tidy walls of Brooklyn, Monsey, and Lakewood? Are we so afraid that the power that comes along with knowledge can get our kids asking some tough questions and maybe thinking for themselves? And if those two questions are too tough to answer, maybe we need to consider much, much larger changes with our practices. $25,000 more. The yeshiva built a new wing, and I was so lost. They honored my parents at the dinner that year, and I just wanted to get out of there. Did I matter at all? Did anyone care about me? Why didn't anyone take the time and effort to ask me how I was feeling? What my concerns were? What my mental and emotional difficulties might have been? Where was the school social worker? Was anyone properly trained in that school? In anything besides Talmud? Where were the trained educators? Why did I feel like a directionless floater in my key developmental years? None of this was addressed by my caretakers at school. And my parents paid good money for that education. I don't blame them. They did the best they could with the information that they had. So I spent the next 25 years figuring it out on my own. Self-medicating and acting it out. Only now, nearing 50, am I completing the education I've always wanted. Only now, nearing 50, am I tending to my old emotional wounds. Only now, nearing 50, am I nourishing a lasting relationship and thinking about building a family. This was my path, I accept that now. But we can do better, folks. We must. Thank you.
Give it up for Avi Bernberg. Was that not incredible? Truly incredible. And also, I will add how inspiring it is to know, which is what we've been saying all along, and it's something that I say all the time at YAFFED, is you just plant that seed of knowledge and you give the kids an opportunity to learn, and they will run with it, you know. We have someone who's capable of an Ivy League degree who was not receiving the education in yeshiva, And it really just goes such a long way providing kids with an education. Just, laying the fundamental groundwork, it goes such a long way, and I'm absolutely confident that there are so many kids in Yeshiva right now who are capable of this, who are capable of flourishing academically, and all you need to do is just plant that seed of knowledge and not shut them out. So once again, I want to thank Avi. Fantastic. I love a musical number as well. Before our next speaker, I actually would really like to give a shout out and express my gratitude on behalf of myself, and also actually on behalf of probably most of the speakers, for somebody who was incredibly generous and gracious and volunteered their time to work with all the speakers. He is here with us. I hope he doesn't get mad at me for calling him out. But everyone, please give a round of applause for David Chemetsky in the back there, who works with all of the speakers and helps every one of us to craft our story. And this event is better for his involvement in it. And so I can't thank him enough. I have to thank him from up here. We have one last speaker. He is one of the original signatories to the first lawsuit that YAFFED brought in 2015. A group of 52 former students, parents, people who had a firsthand impact of this educational neglect, came together and signed off on a lawsuit that really set the gears in motion for New York City education authorities to take notice and start investigating into these yeshivas. And so without our next speaker, Yona, without that lawsuit, we wouldn't have been able to bring awareness to the educational neglect in the yeshivas that people who are coming out of from a firsthand experience and trying to call attention to it. He is a father of 4, and he has firsthand knowledge that children in Orthodox yeshivas can get a sound education that is culturally sensitive, because he is witnessing it every day with his children now. His favorite book is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Please welcome Yona Cohen.
So I want to thank Ben. I want to thank Beatrice and YAFFED for giving me this opportunity. But I have a complaint. How am I supposed to follow Avi? So a little background about me. I am one of the original signatories to the lawsuit in 2015, and how that came about to be was I had a conversation with my religious wife, and I said this opportunity came up, and I asked her, what do you think? And she was like, do it. That is something I have still been fighting for all these years later, because I am paying more than $25,000 in tuition for my 4 children who go to Beis Yaakov's and yeshivas, and they are getting a culturally sensitive, sound secular education. My daughter, who is studying abroad this year, is taking classes, and her educational pursuits are to become a psychiatrist. I have a son who is 11 who, through the yeshiva and through some, is actually into tech, Minecraft and Legos. I hate the Legos. And my other children, they're figuring it out, but they have the opportunity. So a little background about me. I grew up in Borough Park. I went to one of the Hasidic schools there where my education started, and I say education loosely, 7:30 in the morning for morning prayers. And Jewish education, Talmud, Chumash, and all that stuff went until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we had the dreaded English. And what amazed me as I got a little bit older and as I got a little bit more knowledge was I had a greater command of the English language than my teachers. My saving grace that I still see colleagues of mine suffer from daily is the fact that I grew up speaking English in my house. My mom came from England, so I spoke to her, but my education was still porous because it wasn't so much about the educational neglect. And I want to thank Mordechai, for bringing this up, because it's abuse. It wasn't just that we didn't have it, it was ingrained into us. We shouldn't pursue it, that it was bad, that we had thoughts. And what that led for me, and sort of it took me a long time and I'm still recovering from, is the financial impact it had on me. So, but I think it might be helpful to those who are here and to those who might be watching, just a couple of stories that sort of highlight that I think the abuse and just the ugliness of it all. I don't remember what grade it was, but I remember the English teacher coming in, and this was an English teacher who actually knew English and spoke English, and he was going to give us a test that we were practicing for, supposedly for weeks. It was a spelling test. Comes in, sees on the blackboard that it's all written up in Yiddish and things like that, and he goes to erase it. And we tell him the Rebbe does not allow it to be erased. I know someone's chuckling because he heard the story before. And he was like, okay. There was such reverence for the Yiddish teachers, as we call them, that no English teacher would ever go against it. A couple days later, we all get in trouble because we all got 100 on the spelling test. And people were like, the teacher was like, what is going on here? So I and a couple of other students decided to write all the answers to the test in Yiddish on the blackboard. But what happened after that was not that we were punished because we did something wrong. We were punished because we wanted to do good in English. And that is something that continuously led throughout my academic career, if you want to call that. The following year, we had a teacher who tried to teach us math. And when I say tried, because after a full day from 7:30 to 4, trying to get anyone to listen to anyone is just impossible. And he tried to get us to learn math, and we started learning math. And he was teaching us about graphs, bar graphs, pie charts, and I don't know why that spoke to me. And ever since then, I've been fascinated with charts. I'm a little bit of a nerd, which is okay. And I remember I did such a beautiful job with the pie chart, with cars, what was everyone's favorite car. I didn't know I was doing research. I'm asking everyone, what is your favorite car, what color and all that, and I made a beautiful chart. And the teacher saw me giggling. That I got a really high mark, and I was so proud of myself. He took the piece of paper with me, dragged me around the school, and mocked me mercilessly for wanting to do good and being proud. My education, to this day, is something I am dealing with, and why it makes me so angry. It's not a word that many people want to use, but the abuse that tens of thousands of children are going through for no justifiable reason. It's beyond against the law. It's abuse. And my children are thriving with a culturally sensitive Torah education that is costing me, again, more than $25,000. So why is it? And to this day, I still don't understand why this is still happening. But thanks to YAFFED and the voice it's been lending for the past 10 plus years, I think, we are seeing improvements, but we need to see a lot more. I have thought a lot about this issue over the years and why I still speak up. I've spoken at press conferences for YAFFED, why I have advocated no Albany, which is, if you ever want to raise your blood pressure, go to Albany. I'm literally seeing it that kids are hurting. My nephews, my nieces, my cousins. We're talking at this point tens of thousands, and the impact, that strain that it's having on the parents. This isn't just an issue with one specific child not getting an education. It's the life-lasting impact. So I want to thank all of you for being here and for supporting YAFFED in your own way. And if you do have $25,000, I have some tuition to pay.
One more time for Yona Cohn. So I'll leave you with one short story from my last year at my old yeshiva before I switched. The year was 2006. So take ourselves back to 2006. The Mets, who are very near and dear to my heart, were having one of their most successful seasons ever. They really seemed poised to win it all. If you recall back to about half an hour ago, when I was reading from The Chosen, the generation that preceded my generation, my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, there was a love of baseball instilled in them. They grew up with the Rashi, the Tosfos, the Rambam, and also Sandy Koufax and Hank Greenberg. And by the time I was in yeshiva, our Rebbeim, they really discouraged any sort of American hobbies, the pleasures of the Goyish world. But they really couldn't control our home life. And we came home to parents who loved baseball. Many of us came home to parents who loved baseball. My dad would take me out of yeshiva on Sunday schools and take me to Mets games occasionally. So picture this. You're me, you're a teenager, it's 2006. If you're a Mets fan, unfortunately you know how this ends, but I'll walk you through it anyways, if it's not enough torture. But it's Game 7 of the National League Championship Series, and the Mets are one hit away from making it to the World Series. They have their best hitter at the plate, Carlos Beltran, and he's up with the bases loaded. The winning run is on base, but it's 2 outs. And, unfortunately, we know the ending of this story. He strikes out looking. He doesn't even, he just doesn't take the bat off his shoulder. He strikes out looking, ends the game, season is over, wait till next year. My friends and I were absolutely devastated. This was like the only hobby we had, basically. We didn't have time for hobbies. We didn't have sports in our yeshiva. And so this kind of clandestine hobby that we shared with our parents but couldn't really talk about in yeshiva, it had a really dampening effect on our mood the next day in yeshiva. So we get to yeshiva the next day, and the mood is not great. But my Rebbe walks into class, and he is the happiest I have ever seen him. I've never seen him smile before. He has the biggest grin on his face. He goes through the Talmud lesson that day in the most annoyingly good mood. It was like they had pulled the plug off of the internet the night before or something like that. He was just exuberant. It's a real pain for us to make it through this day. And finally, 1 minute before we at like 1:45, the principal would come in and knock on the door and tell us it was time for the afternoon prayers. So it's 1:44. He closes his Talmud a minute early. He stands up. He starts pacing around. And he's holding himself back from laughing. And he points at us and he says, Rabosai, which is, if you know, it's like everybody. He goes, he didn't even swing the bat! In all seriousness, you've heard a lot of stories tonight. Some of them are coming from the perspective of people who are able to look at it in the past, maybe have a chuckle about it, about some of the pleasure that our Rebbeim took in our misfortunes, in just doing normal, healthy teenage things. And you've heard some pretty compelling stories, first-hand accounts, but you've only heard from a select group of people. You've heard from 6 or 7 yeshiva grads, and I invite everyone in this room to think about not just the people you've heard from tonight, but think about 65,000 voiceless children in New York City who don't have the opportunity to do this, who don't really have anybody but us advocating for them. And that's the real story I want you to take away from tonight. The 65,000, not the 7 who have been able to cultivate a story, but the people who don't have their story told for them. And so I invite everyone here to have a chat with the YAFFED staff. I'm here, Beatrice, our executive director, is here, Adina, our director of development, David Golovner, our government and advocacy affairs person, is here. And we're going to stick around, and I hope everyone else does too. And we would love to chat with you about ways that you can get more involved, ways that you can support us in our fight, because we are truly the only ones doing this. And we are a small but mighty team. And so I would invite everyone here to find out how they can get more involved. I will plug, if you have to run, go to yaffed.org, scan the QR code on the sign on your way out, which will take you to our website. You can sign up for our mailing list. And thank you again, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I hope to get to chat with all of you. Adina, would you like to? All right, Adina Konikov.
Really, I just want to say thank you to Ben. So I'd love to get a round of applause for Ben. This is the first time emceeing Yeshiva Stories and pulling off an incredible event. And so from the whole YAFFED team and from everyone in the room, thank you, Ben, for helping bring this work to life. Not every day in the conversations that we get to have about why this work matters to you, and now being able to bring it out to so many more people. And then your job now is to think about who you are going to tell these stories to, right? How many people you can tell the stories that you've heard tonight, and think about, as Ben said, all the kids that their stories aren't being told right now. So we're so grateful that everyone was able to join us tonight. Please enjoy some snacks, come find us to keep chatting, and we'd love to think about how you can get involved. Take care.